No matter how much research about the cost of living in Australia you do, there's really no way of knowing it before you actually move and live it. What most students never realize about studying in Australia is that there are 6 specific costs affecting students' lives right now that nobody really warns them about, and therefore nobody really accounts it in their budget. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through every single one of them, being an ex-student myself here in Australia, and the exact way I would counter each one of them. We're going to be keeping a track of how much money you can actually save throughout, and at the very end I'll reveal that total number so that you know exactly what you can save. As far as my experience goes, first thing every student planning to move to Australia needs to actually understand is what is the baseline budget they're going to be working out of. How much money do they actually need to survive in Australia? Because obviously the biggest number out there is Australia's government official minimum requirement, which is basically to get your visa approved in the first place. You have to prove to the government that you will have access to $29,000 to $30,000 per year for living costs. That works out to roughly $2,500 a month, and that's basically proving that you are not going to be living on the streets. Now on top of that is the tuition. Most master's program in Australia sit between $45,000 to $50,000 a year, and so the $2,500 a month for living is really not random either. It's based on what reasonably frugal students actually spend on, broken down into 5 basic categories. Rent is the biggest single one. A shared apartment in Sydney or Melbourne with 1 or 2 housemates runs between $1,000 to $1,200 a month. Groceries are usually around $350 to $450 a month, depending on how good you're going to be eating or how bad you're going to be eating, and whether or not you'll be cooking at home a lot. Transport obviously is also an extra another $150 to $200 a month, and that's the weekly cap on your Opal or Mikey card as well if you commute every day. Finally, you have stuff like phone, utilities, and personal spending. Altogether about $200 a month. So if you stack all of these 5 together, you basically land somewhere between $1,600 to $2,200 a month in living costs alone. Now that's probably the number most of you out there already have kind of figured out, and that's what you're sitting at, that okay, I would need approximately $2,500 a month. But the worst part is that it is missing about $1,000 a month because of 6 layers stacked underneath it that nobody talks about, and I myself got to learn it with experience here in Australia. And by the way, I also went ahead and built a complete cost of living spreadsheet for you that you can download completely for free. I've been getting a lot of comments asking for that. It has every layer that we're going to cover in real numbers for your city, so go ahead and grab it by clicking the link below. And so the first layer actually hits before your first class even starts, and it actually consists of 3 hidden costs that almost every student completely forgets to factor in. The first one is your OSHC, which is your Overseas Student Health Cover. This is basically mandatory, meaning that everyone has to have that health insurance if you are an international student here in Australia. But the thing nobody tells you about is that you have to pay the entire duration of the course upfront in one single payment. So you have to pay your health insurance amount in one go. So for a 2-year master's, that is somewhere between $1,200 to $2,000 dropping out of your account in one go. Now the way you cut this one down is compare different providers before you actually commit. Your university defaults to one specific option in your enrollment forms, but in my opinion, the rates between Bupa, Allianz and Medibank vary between $200 to $400 over the full course duration. This is the reason I went with Allianz and not Bupa, because Bupa was expensive. It just takes about 5 minutes to check different rates, but it could end up saving you $300 to $400. That can take you a long way once you've actually made the move here in Australia. The second one is your rent setup. Now this isn't your monthly rent. This is what you owe just to get the keys to your apartment. Now, most rental contracts ask for the first month's rent in advance, plus a rental bond of 4 weeks of rent that goes to the state government. So, if you're moving into a shared apartment at, let's say, $1,000 a month, you might be dropping somewhere around $2,200 in one day, because the bond actually gets refunded when you move out, but that's still something that you have to account for, because the cash is not just going to be lying there. You have to think about your budget. But now you cut this one down by skipping the brand new lease entirely for the first month or 2. Take over an existing room in a shared house. Sometimes people are leaving and their bond is already paid and the lease is already running, so you're not starting the lease from scratch. That saves you about $2,000 entirely while you settle in and figure out what you actually want long term. Now the third one is smaller setup stuff. Furniture for your room, kitchenware, bedding, a winter jacket or a coat if you're going to Melbourne or Canberra, a new laptop if yours isn't going to make for another 2 years. None of these are massive on their own, but together they can stack up as high as $2,000 together. Now, you cannot really factor in for everything, and I understand that, and you can't cut it down massively, but there are a couple of things that you can do to massively lower down this number. First of all, do not buy furniture new. Australian students sell off their entire room setups with beds, desks, kettles, microwaves, everything almost every December and every June, because that's when the semester ends. So you can actually furnish your full room from Facebook Marketplace for $150 on the lower end or $250 on the high end, instead of spending $800 on brand new stuff. Second, buy your warmer clothing in Australia, not in your home country. The grade of their warmth might not be right for Melbourne weather, and you will still end up buying it again here in Australia. You can pick one up from Kmart or Big W for literally $50 to $100, and it's going to last a very long time, trust me. Now, with those 3 fixes tagged, the pre-arrival bill drops from $6,000 to close to $4,000, and that's almost $2,000 saved before you've even attended a single class. But the second you've cleared that, the rent number that you've actually been planning around quietly transforms into something you actually end up paying, which is much more. That ends up happening because of 2 specific things. First of all, in most private rental contracts in Australia, your monthly rents does not include electricity, water bill or internet bill. Those are separate utility bills which you either split with your housemates, or you pay on top of your rent if you decide to live alone. And depending on where you live and how much you use, they can actually add up to approximately $100 to $200 a month, meaning that $1,000 rent you plan for is actually now getting closer to $1,300 once the bills hit. Plus, if you ever decide to break the lease early for any reason, the landlord legally owes you nothing back unless you cover the cost of finding a replacement tenant, which could be hectic, and that's another $1,000 on top, easy. So the way you cut both of these as much as possible is by living in an on-campus accommodation. So many students I know dismiss this just because the headline price looks a lot higher than the other alternatives, and I believe it. I know it looks true, but on-campus always includes utilities, internet and basic furniture in that price. Plus, the lease terms are way more flexible for students with shorter commitments and easier exit. There are 3 months contract, there are 2 months contracts, and once you do the actual comparison, on-campus usually comes out a lot cheaper than the private rentals you were actually planning for. But there's still one more thing that is a lot more serious, and that can actually destroy the entire move if it happens to you, which is rental scams. That's actually targeting students specifically because we're vulnerable, and they're actually happening at scale right now, and the pattern is always the same. People list great student-friendly apartment online with basically a fake agent who only communicates over WhatsApp or Telegram or random sim platforms. A request to wire a bond plus first month's rent right before you arrive just to secure the place. But the listing was never real. That agent completely disappears, and you as a student lose all the way from $2,000 up to $5,000 in a year exactly on this scam. Now, the way you can protect yourself is just applying this one specific rule. Never ever transfer a bond or rent money for your property you haven't physically inspected or had someone you trust inspect in person. If the listing actually pressures you to pay beforehand, just walk away. It's just never worth taking the risk and ending up spending an extra month later just trying to recover the rent you just lost. Book a 2-week Airbnb when you first arrive, inspect places in person and then sign. That $400 to $600 in short stay rent is a tiny price compared to how much you can actually lose if you get scammed. So please save yourself and don't get scammed. And once your rent is actually under control, there's a different kind of money bleed that takes over. And surprisingly, you, as many others, will almost never even feel that is happening. I didn't feel it myself. So, this next layer actually costs you more than any other one we'll break down in this video. It is also one of the ones most students take an entire year to even realize they are paying. Because it doesn't come off as one big bill that just hits you at once. It's just small bits and bills that quietly add up. And the big one of this entire layer is eating out. Like, eating out in Australia is a part of the experience. Cafes between lectures, late nights with friends, food courts when you're tired. It is also one of the easiest ways to socialize when you're new. Do you want to go out for coffee? Do you want to go out for lunch? So nobody is realistically going to cook every single meal at home for 2 years. But here's what most students miss. A cafe lunch in Sydney or Melbourne is easily $15 to $25. If you're doing it daily in your first month, that adds up to almost $2,000 in 1 month alone. Now the fix is not cutting eating out entirely. It is basically a 2-hour Sunday meal prep that covers your weekly lunches and dinners and then letting yourself eat out on weekends when it actually matters socially. That's the single biggest swap, and it brings down your food spend to $600 to $700 including the social meals. So over a year, that's $15,000 saved. Now once eating out is sorted, the rest of the layer comes down to swapping a few defaults that most students just inherit from their first week. I did too. Your phone plan is the first. Most students default to Telstra or Optus or even Vodafone at $50 a month. And then you can add up roaming and family calls on top, which pushes it to $50 to $60. Now the smart version is AmeSIM, Lebara or Aldi Mobile, built specifically for international students. $25 a month, lots of GB, gigabytes and calls to India or wherever you're coming from. That can save up to $400 a year. And then you also have to factor in all your subscriptions. The smart version is obviously signing up for Uni Days or Student Edge on day one, which can actually give you lots of student discounts on every one of those services without changing what you actually use. Then obviously there's transport. Public transport with the weekly cap is fine for most commutes, but the short ones under 10 kilometers are way cheaper on even bike share apps like Lime or Bird. You can actually use those for short runs, and your weekend Ubers will stop blowing the rest of the budget as well. Which means that in total you can save around $18,000 a year on this layer without giving up any of the experiences. And then there's one layer which almost nobody plans for because it only shows up at certain times of the year. And the absolute worst part about this is the timing of when it hits. It catches you about 6 months in, right when you think you finally got your budget figured out. Because most Indian students move to Australia with a flat monthly budget in their mind. I did the same. The same number for January and the same number for August. But the Australian climate can be brutal. I've experienced it, and it doesn't really respect that at all, whatever budget you have. Because when the summer kicks in around September, your electricity bill actually spikes up by $200 a month, especially in Sydney or Melbourne, because the air conditioning is suddenly running constantly. You have to turn on the aircon, and that roughly doubles your normal utility cost. And over the 6-month summer stretch, that adds up to around $600 to $800 more than you've actually budgeted for. Then around June, the winter kicks in and opposite happens. It's 1st of June today while I'm recording this video. Heating bills in Melbourne or Canberra can be around $100 to $200 a month on top of your normal usage, especially in older built houses with bad insulation, which is what most students also opt for because the rent is cheap. Now the fix here is not really cutting back on heating or cooling because nobody's going to live without air conditioning in a 40-degree Sydney weather or minus 4 degrees in Canberra. The fix is being smart about where you live in the first place. Smaller, well-insulated shared spaces are massively cheaper to kind of keep comfortable than big, old, leaky student houses. A 2-bedroom flat with one housemate easily beats a 4-bedroom shared house when it comes to, these seasonal spikes. So in my opinion, you should really consider that when you're choosing your place. Always make sure that you're looking at a newer built house and your regional swings will drop by at least half. I remember back in 2018 when I moved to Australia, I started by living in a very old student house. It was the worst house ever, and the insulation was really bad. I think it didn't even have an aircon, which as a landlord you're not allowed to do, but it didn't have an aircon, and because of that we were really suffering. And then we changed and we again moved into an old house which had an aircon, and the bills used to be massive. But now I'm kind of living in a very well insulated apartment which is newly built, and the insulation is really good. Like if I turn the aircon even for heating or for cooling, it actually stays, hot, warm or cold inside. Like it keeps the temperature regulated, and that's how my bills come really low now. So that can save you around $800 a year on the seasonal layer. And then there's one final thing we really need to talk about. Something that, in my opinion, very few people connect to their daily life, which is the money pipeline running between you and your family back home as well. Every single time money moves between India or your home country and Australia, it loses a huge chunk to fees and bad exchange rates. And almost nobody really takes that into account or even mentions it because it never actually shows up to you. You just kind of know that, you're paying a little bit of fee, it is there. But the default setup people use is that your parents send you money or you send them from, they send you from their Indian bank account into your Australian one, and the Indian bank charges $30 to $50 in fees per transfer. They also build in a 1 to 2% margin on the exchange rate that you never actually see directly, which is another $30 to $60 on a typical money transfer. And on the Australian side, big banks like Commonwealth or NAB charge another $10 to $15 just to receive the international transfer. So every single time your parents send you money, you are easily losing somewhere between $70 to $100 in fees, and all that of stuff alone. So over a year of monthly transfers, that can actually add up to $1,000 alone. And now most importantly, that is also before you account for the times you use your Indian debit card at an Australian ATM in your first couple of weeks here. Most banks also charge a $5 ATM fee on top of another 1 to 2%. And now if you multiply all of that across a few weeks, and you've got another couple of $100 gone. So the way you overcome this is two specific swaps. The first one is Wise, which was formerly known as TransferWise. It is an app that does the same job as the bank transfer, except it uses the actual mid-market exchange rate and charges $5 to $10 per transfer instead of $30 to $500, but depending on the amount you're sending. Now it is the same money going to the exact same place, but you're losing way less on the actual transfer. The second is the Australian account you actually receive the money in. Now the big banks obviously all charge international fees on top, but ING, Upbank or Macquarie don't. Their student accounts have zero international transaction fees, and ING even reimburses the ATM fees worldwide. So after my experience, you stop paying that receiving fee entirely and you stop paying ATM fees on top of everything else. And there's one more thing that you can actually add to this setup that will make it even better. The exchange rate between Indian rupees and Australian dollars shifts daily, sometimes by 1 to 2% in a single week. So the smartest way to overcome that is to set up a Wise alert that kind of notifies you when the rate is really good, and then you have your parents transfer a couple of months worth of money in one go if you really need money. One big transfer at a good rate easily beats 4 smaller ones at a bad rate, right? And it almost feels like you're making money. So if you basically stack all of those three together, you can save an additional $600 to $800 a year on this layer alone. Which brings us to something a lot different from all the other layers that we've covered, because in my opinion, it's one area that you really don't want to cut corners on, which is health. But even here, there are still 3 specific moves that can actually save you real money without ever hurting the quality of life. And the first one is OSHC, which is the standard health cover, which is mandatory health insurance every single international needs to have, right? It basically covers your GP visits, hospital, any basic specialist referrals, but it doesn't cover anything dental, optometry, most prescriptions in full or extended mental health. So for students in the first year, those gaps can actually add up all the way up to $600 in your first year alone. So the fix is basically 2-part. First, compare providers before you sign up, as we've already discussed. Bupa, Allianz, Medibank, AHM all set the same baseline coverage at different prices. The gap between the cheapest and the most expensive over a 2-year course can be $200 to $400, and it just takes 5 minutes of comparison and checking around. We've already discussed this, but it can save you a decent chunk of money. Second, add the extra packages to your health cover for around $10 to $20 a month. That covers dental checkups, prescription glasses, and basic physiotherapy if needed. And in my personal experience, that kind of saves you $300 to $500 a year on costs you would have paid either way. The second one is your university's health services. Almost every Australian uni runs on an on-campus health center for enrolled students. GP visits are usually free or fully covered through your health cover, so you walk out basically paying nothing. They also handle your counseling and your mental health support, which is normally one of the most expensive ones to get here in Australia. And if you go out and try to get a private one, it's very expensive. So most students just go to their GP and end up paying $30 to $50 a visit when their uni health center is just 10 minutes away from their classroom. So in my opinion, most students just go to their first general practitioner and doctor and end up paying $30 to $50 a visit when their uni health center is just 10 minutes away from your classroom. So go and avail those services when you can. None of these actually compromise your care. They just save you a pretty decent chunk of money a year on this layer alone. Which brings us to the total savings. And if you stack all of these 6 layers together, your savings come down to around $20,000 a year, or roughly $1,500 to $2,000 every single month, which is easily a flight back home. But in my opinion, none of this actually matters until you've made the move, which leaves you with a bigger question. What if you don't even know how to move to Australia in the first place? Go ahead and click on the video on your screen right now, where I actually break down the exact step-by-step process of doing it the smart way.